Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the place, the home, the platform to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Hell, maybe your best, most true, authentic voice, period. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, make billions of dollars. We're not guaranteeing that last one yet, but we're working on that. But all the rest of it, we feel good about. And we love that you keep watching, liking, commenting, subscribing. And I really believe the reason that's happening is that we get to bring people on who walk the walk. We're all about the art to authenticity, and today is no exception. We got to go, and I'm very excited. I told Victoria that she's needed, and I'll say that publicly as well too. So Victoria Pelletier is an author, a corporate guru. So there's a word that I'm going to ask about because thank God you taught me a new word today. In addition to being a TEDx speaker, in addition to being the founder and CEO of Unstoppable You, a multi-potentialite. I heard someone call themselves. So I had no idea what the hell it was when I was doing my crack research. And now I do.
It's a favorite of mine. So, John, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Thank you.
And yes, multi-potentialite is a way to describe that I have a multitude of interests and passions, and therefore have my hands in many different pots.
Do those interests vary? Do those pots vary? They do for me. Are you the type that comes in and out of like favorite things?
Oh, very much so. Like, I got into many years ago doing natural bath and body works products. I was interested in it and seeing them in stores, so I started making them for myself. Like that on top of being a corporate executive and a mom and all the things. Yeah.
Stirring and
Exactly. Yes. I learned how to, you follow a recipe, but I learned how to, make soaps and creams and shampoos and all, and then I moved into candles, and actually it evolved into a business. It's funny, that interest and passion personally turned into a business that I ultimately grew and sold.
So you scaled your own Bath and Body Works.
Yes.
All right. So, guilty pleasure. That stuff I really like. I'm like a real weirdo with that sort of thing, right? So I don't like heavy fragrance anymore. I like to scale it back a little bit. I don't want to smell like a pumpkin, but I like the idea and I like the intention. I'll focus away from candle making in terms of more why I wanted to have you here was the fact that you are a business leader that combines a lot of things. And I love that. And in this day and age where people are in transition in terms of new careers, second, third, and fourth opportunities, and that sense of reinvention. So I really do want to talk about several things today and not being all over the place. So I did want to touch on your beginning because I think it's so important. And I know you've told it a billion times, and I'm going to ask you if you would be kind enough to share some of this with my audience. I think it would be really greatly appreciated.
Sure. Yeah, John, I do share it openly now, but I definitely didn't earlier in my life for many reasons. I was ashamed or embarrassed by it. I didn't want people to think differently of me because of it. Yet I realized at some point I was doing a disservice, particularly to the people that I would coach or mentor or others who looked up to me because of my executive career, and trying to understand how I got there so early, if I didn't tell them my why, right? What drove me. And for me, that is that I come from very difficult, beginnings, incredibly traumatic. I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me. Such so that I was, pushed upstairs, downstairs, had a cigarette in my eye. That was more carelessness than intention, but sort of talks about my life for the first number of years. I was in and out of the child welfare system. I am fortunate that I was adopted out of that environment, but to, parents of a lower socioeconomic position.
Hmm.
And so my drive is that I was determined to be better than my biology or my circumstance. So I was never had to worry about, not having clothes or being fed, but there was no money in my household. My mom was a secretary, my dad was a school janitor. And so I started working at age 11 to buy the things that I wanted. That said, I still was never able to go on some of the more expensive school trips or my high school graduation.
Got it.
And I tell those stories now. One, you talk about authenticity.
Yep.
I would not be authentic if I didn't say that, those are the scars that I bear, but they're those that make me the woman that I am today, the
Hmm.
human that I am that drives as hard as I do is because I want to be better then. And I set goals and objectives for myself, and I will let nothing stop me achieve them.
So were you driven in school? Although, like you said, you missed the class trip, and I can absolutely relate to that sort of thing. You know what I mean? I remember being pulled out of Glee Club, and I'm old enough to say I couldn't imagine. I have no price relevance, right, in terms of that overall, and I couldn't imagine why my parents couldn't afford what was it, $1 a week? You know what I mean? And it was like so grade wise. Were you able to be driven at that point, even though you had the first horrific start and then different family, but not having a lot of niceties?
I will say I'm fortunate, John, in that I was naturally gifted. In fact, I
Hmm.
ended up
Hmm.
skipping a couple of grades.
Hmm.
And so that came easily to me. And interestingly, I do know more about my biological mother side of the family. And I've got like two of my biological aunts, are professors, right? So
Hmm.
nature nurtured, like there's some things that did
Yeah.
successfully come in that gene pool.
Yeah.
But the drive, so I mean, I got so upset if I didn't like get 100% on an
Okay.
exam, right? So, I was still very much determined
Hmm.
to do well, even though much came naturally to me. I will tell you, there's what I hated the most in school was social studies at the time or history.
Yeah. Oh, why history?
Um, it At the time it didn't excite me. It's so funny because I love learning about history, but also it was pure memorization for a lot when
Hmm.
you came. And I was just like, I tutored, math and sciences, and but that's problem solving, and so it was just very
Hmm.
different than just
Hmm.
memorizing dates. So I think that's likely why. But it's funny as I've grown and matured, some of the things I didn't enjoy as much in school around history and politics, I love now.
I only said that part because I never liked history. It just bored me. And by the way, it's like I wish I knew more, especially when you talk about the politics and the relevancy, you know what I mean, as in present day. No, that's what just got my attention. I'm like, oh my God, it bored me to death. I but I like the fact that when you talk about problem solving, that to me, it's funny that not funny. It's interesting that it's identified because of where it goes and where it takes you. So part of your MO, I mean, look, that it goes to you seem to be a consummate problem solver. And I love the fact that that's where it begins. And you talk about your why and really exposing. How long did it take for you to be able to drop the armor, so to speak, in regards to not necessarily knowing all the answers, because I don't think that ever happens, but more of a sense of dropping the armor enough and having an identification that you were comfortable and confident with?
A long time.
Mhm.
In fact, I had a so much so was I afraid to talk about this that
Mhm.
I did. I had like the proverbial armor up around
Right.
me. that I learned in my mid to late 20s
Hmm.
that I had a nickname at work as of the Iron Maiden. Uh,
Now you
and
were
this
already successful in your 20s.
So my first executive role
Hmm.
came at 24. I got
Yeah.
recruited out of like banking, where I was leading banking call center operations, to become the chief operating officer and general manager for a private, what's called BPO, business process
Right.
outsourcing
Right.
company. And massive stretch role for me because I was very successful at leading operations, but now I was stepping into a role where technology, HR, sales, and marketing all reported to me in addition to the operational side. So massive stretch role,
Hmm.
imposter syndrome, although I don't think we had the vernacular 25 years ago. That feeling was there. And when I stepped into that role,
Hmm.
not only was I inexperienced in a number of areas, as I've said,
Right.
I was the youngest by at
Hmm.
least 2 decades. I was the only woman and the only openly LGBTQ member.
So
Uh,
you were
so
in your 20s. You were
in
you
my
were out.
Oh, I came out at 14 as bisexual or queer. And then at 22, I met my ex-wife and
Hmm.
was together for 11 years. I gave birth to our two children in my
Hmm.
relationship with her. I happen to be married to a man now, but I'm still very openly queer. And
Hmm.
one of my two children is trans. So I embrace our queer community. But going back to, career, so I stepped into
Yeah.
that role 24. I
Hmm.
had all of these things that made me feel like I was so different and I was the only
Hmm.
one. Plus the fact that I was still ashamed of my early years. So I put barriers up.
Hmm.
I'm actually an extremely emotional individual. I cry at Humane Society
Hmm.
commercials.
Hmm.
Um, my husband now jokes that, as we talk at, going out to a restaurant and maybe it's about something slightly emotional, I end up crying in the restaurant. He's like, people must think I'm saying something horrible to you. So that's who I am, but I wouldn't let anyone see it. So the nickname came, I thought it was in part because I was very strong at managing the performance
Right.
of the
Right. And breaking barriers and
right.
and all that sort of
And that
thing.
for sure was part of it.
Hmm.
But on the heels of hearing that nickname, I had a conversation with a colleague talking about having gone to the movie theater that weekend,
I saw this.
and I was like
Thank you.
sobbing. And
Right?
she's like, what? She's like,
Mhm.
Vic. She's like, I thought you'd be the type of person who laughed at people who cried at commercials or cried at movies. And that's when I realized the nickname was more than my work performance.
Right.
And so I made a concerted effort. It was not comfortable or natural. I'm like, what do I need to do to show
Mhm.
up differently? And I realized I had to start being vulnerable. I needed to be authentic in telling my
Mhm.
story and recognizing that vulnerability didn't mean weakness in the workplace. And so I began my shift in my mid to late 20s,
Right.
but it wasn't probably till 8 to 10 years later where I was extremely confident, with it. My mother is the woman that raised me, not my
Thank you.
biological
I
mother.
understand that. Thanks for clarifying. Cool.
She was a phenomenal human who I didn't appreciate it in my teenage years, where she's like, Tori, we need to sit down and talk about this. Let's understand why you're having these emotions, why you're reacting the way you are. She'd force me to be reflective, and I didn't enjoy it. But that's actually one of the things that I then leveraged as like, the super strength and power to then help me break that down. So it came into my third, it wasn't until I really got into my 30s, I'll say, that I started to show up differently, but because my belief system in myself and
Right.
the way people viewed me changed.
So when you first started to realize you needed to evolve, to change, and what have you, what was the reception like like of the process? I don't mean from you. I mean of others that are now going to watch the new Tory, the new Vic, and now I am empathetic and I'm what was that like in terms of not just having the guts to do it, but also the sense of there had to be maybe there were maybe there wasn't some head banging. I only say maybe there wasn't because it's like I just assume I went through a ton of head banging. So what was that like for you? What was it like for them more so as much as for you?
Um, I think it was a little bit easier in the workplace because I
Mhm.
actually moved roles. So I've been a part of so many merger, acquisition, divestitures in my life, that I've moved around a lot.
Oh, okay, right, right, all right.
It was easier for me when I moved to a new employer.
Hmm.
Uh, to just start to do. They didn't have a history with me. So I just showed up differently. That said, and it's funny, I'd posted on LinkedIn a little bit of this journey, this movement from Iron Maiden to one of my nicknames now is the turtle. I'm still tough, I'm resilient, but I have a really soft interior that I do let people see.
Okay.
And so I wrote about this, and
Hmm.
one of my former employees, she actually said, "You're right. Like I've seen this evolution. Like she and I have stayed connected through social media."
Right.
She commented on it. So those in the immediate zone hadn't because they didn't know the prior, they didn't know the Iron Maiden. So that actually made it easier. So when I talk to people now around, many times we have to make that pivot, and it's
Hmm.
difficult. And so you need to demonstrably show up in different ways, and sometimes head on have a conversation with people around why and how you're different, and make sure it's consistent. I was again fortunate because I changed organizations, that it was easier. But to your
Hmm.
point, the people or friends and others around me were like, "Oh, well, this is like a different Victoria that we didn't see before." So they're like, "Oh, like," and but positively so. And it was just like, "Oh, wow!" Like they were pleasantly surprised. It was me who like was uncomfortable, and I'm a big believer that growth, and opportunity doesn't come until you step into that place of
Hmm.
discomfort. And it was not comfortable for me.
I couldn't have been. I want to hear this selfishly as much for me is that I remember for myself, like I left the people pleaser boss, which is a really tough title to to have, you know. You're trying to make everybody happy and you're making no one happy as a result. And I remember that as I was going through my corporate journey and I had through a couple of circumstances wound up coming out of the closet. I was 42 when I came out in earnest. That's why I said so. Thank you. I meant it. You know, I was deathly afraid of what people thought of me, and if you only found out, and and so my pivot came as a result of I caused a pretty significant car accident and got sober as a result. And I remember I went through so many moods and stuff in terms of the process. I don't know how many people were impacted, and I'm thinking very few positively in the very beginning. That's why I think what you just said, I wanted to amplify it, or not only acknowledge it, clarify that as well too. That you said, if I heard you correctly, I was, having conversations with people in regards to why or that I'm about to. How do those conversations work? I mean, really, if people are looking to take steps in terms of changing themselves, how do they have the conversation with those around them?
Mm. That's interesting, and I think it depends on the person, and that's a very good consultant speak. Although having
Hmm.
been in
I
that
know,
space,
sure,
I'm quite good at
right,
that. But it really does. I mean, so for some, like I think of, when I'm coaching people, I
yeah,
say, look, if we're going to get into a relationship here
hmm,
together, let's kind of talk about expectations, and I actually want to talk about my style. I have always
hmm,
operated before the vernacular was written around radical candor. I've always operated in that regard. I
okay,
am comfortable having the difficult conversation, but I do it from a place of care and compassion.
hmm,
Not everyone can receive that. And so I'm very upfront with people. And so when we're talking about their need to, pivot or do things differently and start to have those
right,
conversations, for some, there's a softer approach in terms of how I lead into that. And then there's others where I'm like, whoa, 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 dude, like let's put the cards on the table. Let's have an open dialogue around this. But I also, when I have those conversations with people, here's the opportunity where I lean it. So being vulnerable to say, look, here's how I did it, and I got it wrong. I
hmm,
had, if I can, share with you this at all to solve, to limit some of the pain that you might have, then please let it help. And so again, different depending on the individual,
hmm,
but that's kind of the approach that I take with them and leverage my story if it's helpful at all,
hmm.
in their journey forward.
So, thank you. So, as you are speaking with people, and I don't mean in 2025, I mean just literally as you have accelerated, progressed in terms of having the conversations when you're speaking to a group within an organization, it's obviously different than speaking to a singular individual. And when you're speaking and you're running organizations, what's a team meeting like when you first start?
Well,
I
so
don't mean
that
every team meeting. I'm saying like the first one. Hey, everybody, we've got, here with change and evolution, and our new technical officer is, and you were, how do you set you brought up setting expectations. How do you set the expectations to get buy-in, in terms of, because you need people. So it's like, I'm always curious, how do you walk the line of setting the expectations as to you want, but having them actually do it?
Well, so the couple of things as it relates to meetings. So going back to the Iron Maiden, I will tell you,
Yeah.
in the 20s, I walked into meetings and it was like, boom, we're right into the agenda. All business, all the time. It
Hmm.
didn't take enough time for us to engage as humans and
Okay.
build. So now when I start meetings, I do, I used to have to force the kind of small talk because again, it wasn't natural, wasn't
Yeah.
innate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it is. But when I show up, the first several meetings of the minutes of the meeting are very much just about engaging with people,
Hmm.
building connection and relationship.
Hmm.
And then I move into into the agenda. And so for me, I want clarity in terms of what are we here for today? Far too many meetings. So like, let's just make them matter. And so be really clear on what we're here today to
Hmm.
discuss with a structured agenda and what we expect our outcomes to be. And I'm also one who is holds people to account. Like, so great deal of accountability. So also when we come into subsequent meetings, we're going to review. So here's what we covered last time. Here's what we agreed. Here's what the action items are. Let's go through that and make sure, again, everyone's coming prepared to that meeting to discuss that and that there's been progress taken. If not, you take accountability. I sign my social media posts with two hashtags generally. One is unstoppable, but the other one's no excuses.
No excuses. Yep.
My children don't love. Actually, probably my employees sometimes neither, but that's how I kind of set the stage. And then one last thing I'll say
Yeah.
on this as well, John, is for me, you talked about action. How do you get people, on board? So I've
Hmm.
spent a lot of time managing a significant amount of change, whether it's the
Hmm.
M&A activities or just going through transformational projects at work. And a big part of that is in success in that is the change management piece. And that's around a big part of that is around communication. So am I being open and transparent to the
Right.
extent that I can be?
Hmm.
There's not all
Oh
things can be
yeah.
shared. But even sometimes it's saying,
Hmm.
I can't share this with you, but let me talk
Hmm.
about this. And so being very transparent, being very open, and connecting the why for the individuals, the what's in it for me, how is this going to impact me, and also connecting it to purpose. And sometimes that's that and or mission, making it very again going back to connection, for those individuals.
Let me ask you, when was the first time, or maybe it was a bunch of times, I can still remember the first boss that treated me with respect. Um, when was the first time you felt like you worked for somebody before you were, in essence, leading the company? When was the first time you felt, oh, they hear me
Hmm.
and helped you grow?
Uh, that's a bit hard. I've been asked many
Mhm.
times around like, do I have a mentor? And
Mhm.
and generally the answer is, although smart leaders I've worked for, some who've been kind and I've had connection with,
Right.
I've in general I've had poor leaders who I've learned to be nothing like.
Hmm.
That's it.
Hmm.
I worked in a bank throughout university. The plan for me, by the way, was to be a lawyer. I had no intention of going like in down the path I am now, but I
Yeah.
followed passion and I love the
Yep.
challenge.
Yep.
Um, while I worked in banking, there were a couple of good leaders. There was one, and so it was, I must have been 20 years old, but many years actually in the
Hmm.
workforce. And she was one who I think heard me, was one of the first that heard me.
Hmm.
Um, but then it wasn't probably till a decade later where I had a leader who I really admired.
Hmm.
Um, I think he had some things around his own vulnerability, probably around just in his
Oh,
leadership approach that he could have
right.
improved. But he was such an exceptionally smart leader who really deeply respected
Hmm.
team members who would push and challenge him. And so I learned a lot from him, and I appreciated his leadership. And funny, even though I think he had an opportunity around vulnerability, I was still in my journey. I was in
Okay.
those early 30
Hmm.
years. I remember he pointed at it. He's like, he said, Victoria, you know it's okay to be vulnerable. And at this point, I'm like, I'd already started that journey, but I clearly wasn't there. And he just reminded me of it.
Thank you. I love that part. I remember for myself personally, like I came from an era of an all boys club, right? And at my age, the industries, like I said, I was in the finance industry. Then I began my career in ad sales, and I say that because I've had bosses that played that old boys club, that sense of preening, posturing, not allowing themselves to show vulnerability, always needing to toughen up and all that sort of thing. And it made me, because that wasn't me, I might have, I don't even look the part, but I was going to say, I certainly wasn't in my mind the part. And I always felt less than. And that's why I asked who was the first one that heard you. Because, like, for myself, it took a little bit. When people ask me, the top three bosses that I've ever had were all women, and they were all different, and they were all different personality types. And some were wildly driven, and some were, but it's the vulnerability part that I just remember that was the first time I was heard. I
Hmm.
just remember that. And to me, I think that's really cool. And that's why I asked the question that there's something because I it gave me that person, her name's Dorothy Brunson, and she's passed away. But I say that because I stayed in the television sales management profession because of her. And so that's the stuff that I think is like to me so powerful. So I love the fact that you were in essence, leading but needing to learn how to get rid of the armor, so to speak. So I'm curious now in terms of moving forward. There are so many ways in terms like for me, I still see business as a pendulum in terms of we either become all remote or we all go back to the office or we all do this and we all do that. How are you finding as you speak, write, think, lead? What are you finding in terms of trends, tendencies right now in terms of getting people to do what you want? How what are some of the ways that you're able to do that and remain authentic?
Yeah, as it relates to the physical workplace,
Hmm.
we're hearing in the news, of course, for certainly for those in the US, more and more of a push to a physical return to the office,
Right.
and some demanding that to be on a full-time basis.
Hmm.
And then others, like the company I work for, we're a remote first company.
Hmm.
And I want to see that pendulum swing much more squarely to the middle. And by that, I think hybrid environments are
Mm.
the best
Yeah.
because uh, I think you want to create flexibility for your workforce
Hmm.
to work around the demands outside of the workplace, and demonstrate trust. Sometimes I
Ah.
think there's a demand for people to return to the office because
Hmm.
there are leaders who think if I don't see bums in seats, I can't ensure productivity and I don't trust
Yep.
my people that they're doing, their work. That disappoints me. But I also recognize the collaboration
Hmm.
when we're together in person, um, brings great like innovation and
Hmm.
problem solving in
Hmm.
a way that we can't necessarily do through a Teams video call.
Right.
And I think for the newer to the workforce, the networking that happens to help them with their career and meet new people that they might not otherwise, again, in a remote environment to help support them on their career path and
Hmm.
journey, the learning that happens when you're amongst others, that you can't recreate in the same way in a remote environment. So I
Hmm.
think there needs to be more of a hybrid environment. And so I'm saddened by those I hear that are pushing purely to 100% in the office without creating flexibility. And I am supportive of remote first, but creating the opportunity to bring people back in person.
Hmm.
Also, I would say the other dynamic that's at play is the way that people's work is changing with the evolution of new technology and
Hmm.
particularly AI. And so there's going back to talking about change management, there's a need to manage what that looks like
Hmm.
for our workforce to assure them that we will help bridge their skills, help develop their skills for the future that aligns to the business or the technology strategy. And going back again to connecting to purpose and mission,
Hmm.
that's the leader's role down to the front line level, not just for the execs, like to a level down. Like we're talking every way through the organization. So we need to be thinking much more around ways of working and how things are going to evolve and change. And I hope that people are not completely scared by AI. The
Hmm.
work that gets left behind, that stays behind, that doesn't get automated. That's the part personally that excites me. It's the exception management, it's the problem solving. That becomes a different level of engagement with a customer than just handling the basic routine questions over and over again.
I love that you brought up, and I will get back to AI, I promise in a moment, because it's I was a slow, I will sadly admit that I was a slower convert. And treated it like a fly, like get away, get away, get away. You know what I mean? It's like, and I'm wildly grateful for it now. But here's what I was going to ask you. You brought up, and you've brought it up in several interviews. I just like it. So when you talk about, and you just were alluding to it, the no schedules, just deliverables part. Uh, I just like it. How does that work?
Yeah, that for me, and it's a phrase that I've had with my team
Hmm.
for a very long time. I don't know how far it goes back to, but definitely long before COVID, when moving into
Oh, okay. Got
remote
it.
environment. Yes, no, I've
Mhm.
I've had it for years before that, and it came about because people would ask me for permission to leave early, to take aged parents to a
I'll
doctor's
take my kid to
appointment.
a hospital. Is it okay if I leave 10 minutes early?
Yeah, or take a kid to a soccer game.
Right.
And for me, it's like I never wanted people to ask me permission. I
Hmm.
trust you to understand that we have deliverables to one another and to the clients or customers that we serve.
Right.
So for me, you've never had to ask me for
Hmm.
permission. So that's this no schedules. Like we're committed to one another and our clients to get the work done. How, where you do that has never been of concern for me.
Hmm.
Now, there are some exceptions to that. So I think of when I used to manage contact centers. Well, we need
Yeah.
people actually online at certain times when the call
Hmm.
volume is so different. But now that I sit, and I've got other executives reporting to me, whatever. If you want to be off Friday afternoon because maybe you're having margaritas early, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter to me. Are you getting the work done? Are you showing up when our clients say you need to? And
Hmm.
that for me has been about creating trust with my team. So again, I didn't need to see their bums in seats, to know that they were getting the work done.
How are you able to help navigate, whether it's within your own organization or other organizations, the conflict that I've seen where you talked about, in essence, the field generals, sorry, typically men, marching up and down the cubes and where's John, and you know what I mean, and all that sort of thing, and you professing this before COVID, which I think is magnificent, but how are you able to communicate that effectively so that there is, well, let's say, complete buy-in to the best of your ability, not total absolute, because good luck with that. But I'm going to say, how are you able to communicate that to make it work in an organization so somebody is not at risk? Because, well, Victoria said, and that.
Um, I spend a lot of time, talking to leaders about, and I've sort of evolved the talk track. I would talk about the future of work. The reality is that future is here, and so that's the AI, that's the hybrid
Mhm. Yep.
workforce. But what I also mean
Mhm.
by that is the expectation of employees have changed dramatically. The
Mhm.
command and control
Hmm.
that sounds like you entered the workforce and it was as I entered the workforce, that's what I experienced.
Yep.
Um, that doesn't work
Hmm.
anymore. Now, there's still, I will say, culturally in other parts of the world, there's still a little bit more of that that's more generally accepted than it would be in North America. But it doesn't work. And actually, COVID dramatically changed this. There was already a movement, but the quiet quitting, the great resignation, all the
Right.
things we've heard in the headlines, that was this groundswell from employees who were saying they wanted to work for leaders who were different than what they'd seen before, and for organizations. And so they wanted to get connected to purpose. So that critically important in terms
Right.
of wanting to buy from, work for companies that were aligned to purpose and values,
Hmm.
and the mission. So again, as I said earlier, the connectedness that leaders need to do to the work the frontline employees do to all
Hmm.
levels of the organization. So that's one. And again, working for leaders who are authentic, who are transparent,
Hmm.
who care about their employees. I don't, like talking about, I don't know if you follow, Peter Lencioni and talks about, the motivation, like, and,
Hmm.
as leaders, not servant leaders, there's one kind of leadership. And he talks about this around, our motivation to drive around as leaders around it responsibly. And so I
Hmm.
talk to leaders about responsible, and I have been before I even listened to Lencioni recently, responsible leadership. And that becomes a balance between that emotive piece and connection to mission and purpose with the other strategic elements of our business. And it's this unique and fine balance. So I have that conversation, and I come from a place of being informed and can serve up data to support what I'm talking about and the need to lead differently.
Oh my gosh. That's to me, it's one of the more frustrating parts is the pendulum and the mind changing. So I think that element of consistency and solution just helps, right? One of the things, and again, I'm biased, so I'm leaning into as well too. Speaking of pendulums and shifts, have to do in the workforce with DEI and the rationale behind leading with it, removing it, or changing it to a point that it doesn't matter and it doesn't exist. You have been a massive proponent in terms of the DEI fight. What are you seeing now in terms of, I don't mean good, bad, right, wrong. I simply mean like ways that it matters and how and why should it continue to matter?
Yeah, I'm saddened
Yeah.
to around what we see and hear around we don't need to have the political conversation, but the
Hmm.
politics are driving the actions and behaviors of many organizations. And that saddens me
Right.
because I have been an advocate around diversity, equity, inclusion
Hmm.
as long as I can remember. My mom was an incredible human who like talked about, we grew up in a, or I grew up in like a very not super diverse city, but yet she always spoke around the wonder of diversity. And when I got relocated to a city that was, I thrived so much more.
Right.
When I stepped into that first executive role. So let me talk about the world of outsourced call centers. That generally wasn't seen as the destination job. You go there because you're a new immigrant to the country,
Right.
and you could be a doctor, a lawyer, but you're not certified in that country, and so you need to
Hmm.
find a job, or you're underemployed and it becomes a part-time. And so
Hmm.
the the diversity that was in that environment was incredible. And but the turnover was massive. We're talking 200 or 300% per year. And an environment where you need people to be productive. In many cases, you get paid for performance on outcomes with your clients. So
Okay.
I'm trying to drive like performance. I'm trying to have people stay longer so my cost to recruit isn't as high. And the light bulb like just turned on for me. In part, I also felt like I was the only, as I described earlier.
Well,
And
yeah.
so I wanted to create an
Hmm.
environment where people felt included. They could bring, we would have potlucks and they could bring what they ate in the
Hmm.
countries that they had to their. So I realized it early, early on. And going back to like talking about fact and figure, there is so much data that shows that having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace drives better outcomes.
Hmm.
problem solving, innovation.
Mhm.
Actually, your risk level, even when you think about diverse board level, reduces. It brings great benefits.
Mhm.
So I am sad to see that companies are removing it.
Mhm.
That said, I'm also seeing it under a guise of let's remove it formally from our website, yet many of them are still saying we are committed to
Mhm.
inclusion in different ways, because again, wherever their funding is coming from,
Right.
so I don't want, I've seen many companies prior to some of the recent changes do it for the sake of being performative, and I didn't actually believe that under the covers they were actually committed to it. So I'm seeing,
Ah.
polarity on both ends.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, I'm hopeful, that we all remain committed to wanting to, live in,
Mhm.
work in, and be in a world that is, much more inclusive for all.
I like your choice of words. I'm not like the word when you say saddened. I get it, but I like your choice of words because it's there's a heart. I think one of the things that I was grateful for, especially later in my career, was, and I worked for a Spanish language television network, and I love the fact that, as I said, that was front and center, and as they used to, like I said, they would just roll their eyes at me when I would try to speak Spanish in a nice way. You know what I mean? It was almost like they would give me a pat on the head when I would try, but they always included me in everything. The Spanish language people at the Spanish language company, um, when they talk about the mantra of the way that Latinos just welcomed, invited, and included. And I always felt like, from a DEI perspective, from a diversity, equity, and I'll say the words diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, that that's all you're asking. That's all the hell you're asking is, you know what I mean? Just make somebody comfortable. And so I appreciate the fight. What would you think somebody in an organization that it matters to them for whatever reason, they're a part of it or they're an advocate or whatever the case may be, what are some of the steps that they could take? Every organization's different, and I get it, and it's not a loaded question, but I'm simply asking, what are some of the things that somebody could do, if not to fight the fight, to at least acknowledge the fact that that's real and that's, to me, biased the way it should be?
Yeah, there's a number of things. I think if you come from a majority, let's just say,
Yeah.
uh, the opportunity to do some diversity training or unconscious bias
Mm-hmm.
training is helpful. But I also think, speaking up, I think there's things that you can do when you see it happening, like raise your voice. But I also think there's
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to help. So if you're a leader in a meeting and you're seeing some people, whether it's women or, or minorities or wherever
Right.
you fall on
Mm-hmm.
that spectrum, to take a moment to say, Sue, Joe, Hal, like, why don't you speak? Share your point of view. Like, I just think there's easy ways to be an ally
Mm-hmm.
and to create a sense of belonging. But that needs to come with awareness, education, and intention.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those are simple ways to help, without being able to solve, world peace.
No, to at least start to at least start a new conversation in the shifts and what have you. I also wanted to, because I said it before and I go brain dead and forget. I'm going to go back to one thing, which is I really do want to talk about, with you as your company, and you are such proponents of AI in the workforce. And I said a while back, hey, I was a very slow roll as it got to that vantage point. When people are trying to speak authentically, it doesn't mean that should be the life goal, but at least has helped me, in terms of being and how do you make that work with what is perceived as a cold technological shift, in that using platforms and words are chosen for you and thoughts and sequencing and all that sort of thing? How do you humanize it?
You start with human-centered design first.
Okay. Talk to me
Um,
about that. I love that answer.
well, and so it's interesting. Like you can build, AI and chatbots and use Copilot, every,
Mhm.
in your day.
Sure.
But so you start with the human experience.
Hmm.
And so understand the different personas, right? The user types, so the end user versus a manager or administrator versus the customer on the other end. So you need to
Hmm.
start with the experience at a
Hmm.
human level and
Hmm.
design for that. And you want your AI is always learning as well. So making sure you've got a model that's learning from its user. I'm a massive proponent of AI. I mean,
Yeah.
I am technology,
Hmm.
but I've been an early adopter of tech for a long time,
Hmm.
and I love that it learns, from me. But there's also learning for the individual, by the way. And so, actually, I have a large part of my team that handles change management. And one part of it is actually just working with the change associated with AI.
Hmm.
How do I prompt the technology to serve me better, learn? So it goes both ways. That the AI is learning constantly, but
Hmm.
hopefully doing it again as we design it from a human-centered perspective for the different personas. But then also we as users, hopefully we get the right learning and tools and change management to utilize the
Hmm.
AI more effectively.
I think that was one of the more exciting things. I love the way you said it, and one of the more exciting things for me in the usage of AI, and in terms was that AI learns from you. And I'm telling you, it took me a minute to get there. It really took me a minute. And I hate to sound so archaic and all that stuff, right? But once you realize that it's well, you get to program it, and I'm like, well, I don't know. You do, and there's a joy to me now in regards to being able to do things that play to my strengths when I'm coaching or speaking with people, that you get to play to your strengths so much more. And rather than just sitting doing boring, tedious, it's great. Um, you are a more than proficient storyteller. How do you help others to be able to, you're like I said, you're a classic and just watch your videos, watch, you know what I mean? Watch you speak. How do you help others to become a better storyteller?
Um, in many ways. So whether it's speaking on, stages or speaking in a
Yeah,
boardroom, trying to
yeah.
move, like it's about emotion. And so emotion, you go back to authenticity around vulnerability, around, share, like don't launch into the all business all the time that I once was, right? And so
Yeah.
that's a big part of it. But it's also, and it's funny, I was listening to a podcast this morning. It's a former colleague of mine. He's phenomenal.
Ooh,
Jeremy Wait Connell or Connell Wait. I'll look it up as we're talking.
yeah.
Jeremy Connell Wait. There we go.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, he is amazing, and he's got a new podcast out called 10 and 10. So less than 10 minutes, and
Ooh.
he is a storyteller, and he puts
Hmm.
his stuff out there for free. But he was actually talking on this morning's podcast that I was listening to about the New York Times opinion
Hmm.
writer. Forget his last name now, but around storytelling, he said, "Look, you're either going to be heating or lighting." And so it's a big way. I like the way he described it. And so
Hmm.
he said, heating, you're creating emotion and connection. So people
Hmm.
either love it or hate it. Or light, they're learning something. And
Hmm.
so when I teach, storytelling, it's around connection with emotion. There's a call to action.
Hmm.
And you're making it, personal to those. And then there's of course a story arc. So although I do this all the time in terms of in a business context, you still need to create that story arc. It isn't just for fiction. And so that's how I try and teach others to do it.
Hmm.
And in terms of how they're going to connect with their audience.
So one more question for the moment. You've got kids, they've got obviously a different parent than you were first, again, who, like I said, the problems, the damage. Um, what do you teach your children? What do you feel like you keep coming back to in regards to the lessons that you share with your children as they continue to, get older and whatever? Where do you keep drawing from, do you think, the most in regards to what's important as it regards to their own authenticity?
Uh, oof. My greatest success as a parent,
Hmm.
um, is that I have two really good humans.
Mm.
So that's success for me. Um, but what I've tried to instill in them, and this has been hard because it's funny, and like I wanted to give them everything I didn't have growing up. And so I think that sense that the drive, because they didn't come from where I came from. So I've worked very hard to try and, create a life for them that I didn't have, and all the experiences and joy that came, with, my success in my career, but balance that with the understanding the value of hard work
Mm-hmm.
and a dollar. But that said, also always talked to them about following their passion as it related, particularly around their vocation or like career. So, my youngest one asked me, I think at 14, like, Mom, what do you think I should do? Like, go, for work when I grow up. And I remember saying, like, what do you love doing? And my youngest is trans male, so she at that point now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I will use she, her pronouns at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, but what do you think? And I said, look, Beauty, I said, you could either like you could sit, sell ice to Eskimos. So I could see you in sales,
Mm-hmm.
or she'd been really good at helping special needs kids. And I said, I could see you working with children. And she said, well, which one makes more money? I was like, I could tell you that, but that's not what I mean. So, the path that he's on now is very much down a path that is very connected to what is deeply. So, he wants to be a social worker, and connect with people. And I'm like, that's great. Is it going to earn, 6 or 7 figures? Maybe not. But you know what? You're going to be happy. And so it's about finding that balance, or working hard, understanding the value of money, but doing it in a way that, you love getting up every day.
Oh my God. So that's so nice. Not better than nice. It's so powerful to hear. You've got a killer website. I find you easily on virtually all social media. Where in your mind is the best place, the most comprehensive place to find you?
Probably my website, because it will allow people to click out to their preferred platform of choice. And so my website is Victoria or Pelletier.com. I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes. So
100%. And that's like I said again, I wouldn't tax you with that. 100%. I just want to make sure I don't leave anything out, because I really believe that this conversation needs to continue, not just for me on a personal level, but I really believe that these are all steps. And I think the way that you are able to navigate up and down staircases, so to speak, is really impressive, because it would be great if we were all at the finish line and nothing ever changed. But I know that this is all a work in progress for everybody. So that sense of being able to continue the journey means a lot. Victoria Pelletier, thank you so much for showing up for us today too, and sharing your own arc to authenticity. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
100%. Folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. Keep liking, watching, sharing, commenting, and we'll keep driving content through your front door. John Duffin here, Duffin Media. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.